You know, when I sat down to write Awakening, I had not written nonfiction in almost 18 years. I've spent much of the recent years writing in fiction. And so I was really revisiting America 18 years after I had last talked about the state of our politics, our culture, and our spiritual destiny. And in some ways, as I wrote this book, my heart broke, because I write about the founding of our country, about previous spiritual awakenings. The First Great Awakening, which helped pave the way for the American Revolution, helped to prepare the mind of the colonists to build a nation, to borrow John Winthrop's phrase, that would be a city on a hill, that would be a beacon and an example of such liberty and righteousness and holiness and human rights and democracy that people all over the world would emulate it. That all happened because of a spiritual outpouring. The Second Great Awakening paved the way for the Civil War and the end of slavery. There were millions of Americans who combated alcohol abuse, dueling, slavery, and other social ills at the time, birthed the Republican Party, nominated Abraham Lincoln, elected Lincoln, and then helped end the sin and the evil of slavery. I write about the Third Great Awakening, which happened right before the Civil War in 1857, 1858, and 9, in which tens of thousands of people in New York City and other major cities came to Christ. And then I talk about what some historians call the Fourth Great Awakening, the rise of the electronic church, the rise of what some have called the religious right, the moral majority, later the Christian coalition, of which I was a part, and then also the movement from liberal drift to conservative theological orthodoxy by the Southern Baptist Church and by the Roman Catholic Church under John Paul II. And many people believe that Fourth Great Awakening helped to lay the predicate for Ronald Reagan and for the victory in the Cold War and for the disintegration and the defeat of the Soviet Union. And as I wrote about these things, I hungered and I yearned to see a spiritual awakening in our own time. Because the truth is that if you look at America's fiscal crisis, $17 trillion in debt, about $50 trillion in unfunded liabilities between Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other entitlements. If you look at America's economic crisis, 11 million people unemployed, 9 million people have left the workforce, 47 million people living in poverty, about 1 out of every 6 Americans. All those economic problems of chronic unemployment, indebtedness, and poverty and dependency. And if you look at our moral crisis, 1 out of every 3 pregnancies ending in abortion, 1 out of every 2 marriages ending in divorce, a redefinition of marriage by the courts, you begin to ask yourself, is there hope for America? And the answer is yes, emphatically yes, as long as we have a spiritual awakening that leads to cultural renewal, that leads to a tidal wave of reform in our politics and new leaders like we saw with Ronald Reagan. It's happened before, it can happen again. And Awakening isn't just a history book. It doesn't just tell you what's happened in the past. It gives you tangible, practical, hands-on advice and a guidebook of sorts of how we can make it happen again. So I hope you'll get Awakening. Go to awakeningbook.net. Go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or christianbook.com. And I hope you'll get this book and share it with your friends. And please pray for me and pray for Awakening, that everyone who reads its pages will be stirred in their spirit to see America return, not only to greatness, not only to economic greatness and military greatness and moral greatness, but to return to the God that birthed this great nation. Thank you.